My name is Thomas Aldridge. I am 72 years old, and on the day we buried my wife of 43 years, I sat in her kitchen and told her sister something that changed everything my son thought he understood about his inheritance. I know about the will, Helen said. I know Curtis has been removed entirely. I know, I told her, because I was the one who asked Dorothy to do it. The silence on that phone lasted longer than any silence I've ever sat inside. Curtis didn't know yet. He was coming over the next morning to talk about the estate situation. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe, drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back 22 months to a March evening when my son asked one careful question too many and I started keeping a notebook. I spent 38 years as a licensed pharmacist in Pensacola. The last 24 running my own pharmacy on Palafox Street. A pharmacist's mind organizes itself around interactions, the detail that doesn't fit the pattern. The small deviation that seems reasonable alone but compounds into something dangerous over time. That discipline followed me everywhere, including home. Dorothy, my wife of 43 years, was a third-grade teacher for 26 years. Warm but never soft, the daughter of a Baptist preacher. Precise about naming things without excess emotion, her father used to say she was born facing forward and never once turned around. We had 2 children. Patricia, 40, called every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 years after Dorothy's diagnosis without being asked. Drove up from Atlanta 12 times and never once mentioned the estate. Curtis, 45, lived across the bay in Gulf Breeze, worked in commercial insurance, and began calling more frequently after Dorothy's diagnosis. Warmth applied intentionally rather than offered naturally. In March, 2 months after the diagnosis, Curtis sat with me in the living room after Sunday dinner and asked, framed as practical planning, whether Dorothy and I had thought about how things were organized. For the estate, I said we had an attorney and everything was in order that evening. I started a notebook. I wrote down exactly what he'd said. The way I'd once documented drug interactions, no interpretation, just the facts. The notebook grew in April. Curtis asked about the pharmacy sale proceeds. Framed as curiosity about a friend's situation in May, he asked Dorothy directly about our vacation house in Gulf Shores. Framed as love, as not wanting conflict after she was gone. Dorothy told me that evening at the kitchen table. Curtis asked me about the Gulf Shores house today. I said I knew. She said she'd been watching it longer than that. That was the first time we named it between us, not with bitterness, just precision. He loves me. Dorothy said, but what he's doing isn't coming from love. It's coming from the part of him that organizes relationships around what they might provide. And right now, what I might provide has a deadline on it, and he can feel the deadline. That's the word he used. I remember thinking planning for everything that used to be simply visiting his mother. In October, 9 months into treatment, I found something I hadn't been looking for. Dorothy's hospital patient portal had been accessed 6 times over 3 months from an IP address. I didn't recognize I sat with that for 2 weeks, ruling out every innocent explanation. Dorothy's own browser. History, our home Wi-Fi. Curtis's visit dates against the calendar. Every alternative eliminated itself. The IP address traced to a residential service area in Gulf Breeze. My son had been reading his mother's oncology notes and prognosis without telling anyone. I didn't confront him. I kept watching, kept documenting, the way 38 years of pharmacy work had trained me to verify before acting. I called Margaret Forsythe, Dorothy's estate attorney, and laid out what I had. She recommended we subpoena Curtis's phone records once any will change was made to establish the documented pattern behind it. What those records eventually showed was a series of 14 calls between Curtis and a contact identified only as Dennis W., 12 to 47 minutes each, spanning the exact same 3-month window as the portal access. Estate investor Curtis had been in contact with about the Gulf Shores property, discussing its market value, discussing timelines, discussing what he called positioning, before anyone else in the family knew there was anything to position for. Dorothy read through what I'd compiled at the kitchen table one evening, quiet for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called Margaret Forsythe herself. Margaret explained the process plainly. Dorothy could revise her will at any time for any reason, as long as she was of sound mind, something two independent physicians would need to confirm and document, given her illness, to protect the change from any future challenge. Curtis, unaware any of this was happening, made one more attempt that fall, a visit with flowers and groceries. Warm and attentive, gently mentioning that he'd found a great resource for organizing family estates efficiently, if we ever wanted to look into it. Dorothy told him, "We'll think about it," and gave nothing else away. Patricia, who knew nothing of any of this yet, called one evening just to check on her mother, her voice carrying the same steady worry it always had. She noticed something had shifted in the house, though she couldn't say what. 3 days before she died, Dorothy asked me to sit with her. We talked about what we'd both been watching for nearly 2 years. I wish this were different. I wish Curtis had been the son who called because he missed his mother, instead of one who read her charts to calculate a deadline. I wish love hadn't needed a notebook to prove itself, but wishes don't protect an estate, documentation does. I held Dorothy's hand that afternoon and didn't try not to cry. Not from weakness, from finally watching my wife choose, with total clarity, exactly what she wanted her last decision to say. It was 11:50 p.m., 3 days before Dorothy passed. The house on Cervantes Street was quiet. The Gulf breeze moving the curtains the way it always had. Dorothy sat up in bed with Margaret on speakerphone, finalizing the language of the revised will. We went through it one final time. Curtis removed from the distribution entirely. Patricia and the grandchildren as primary beneficiaries. The medical documentation attached confirming Dorothy's full mental capacity at the time of signing. "You're doing exactly what you want, Dorothy," Margaret said, "nothing more." Dorothy signed at 12:03 a.m. 12:03 a.m., she was 70 years old. And in 3 days, her son would learn that the mother he'd been quietly reading like a countdown had seen him clearly the entire time. Across the bay in Gulf breeze, Curtis was almost certainly asleep, still believing his patient attentiveness had positioned him exactly where he wanted to be. He'd learn otherwise the morning after her funeral. Curtis came over the morning after we buried Dorothy, just as he'd told me he would, ready to discuss the estate situation. I let him sit down. I told him the will had already been changed 3 days before his mother died, and that he received nothing. His face moved through the same 4 things I imagine most people's do in that moment: confusion, recognition, the calculation of a man realizing the confrontation he'd prepared for had already been decided without him. "Dad, there has to be some mistake. I don't understand. You accessed her medical portal 6 times without her knowledge," I said quietly. "We have the records. We have the calls to Dennis Whitfield about Gulf Shores. Your mother knew exactly what she was choosing, and exactly why." He looked at me like I was still the father he thought. He could quietly outmaneuver I hadn't been for 22 months. He didn't say much else. He left within the hour. Dorothy's father used to say she was born facing forward and never once turned around. I always thought that meant her optimism. It meant something sturdier, that she could look straight at a hard truth and still decide, calmly, exactly what to do about it. Curtis and I speak rarely now, mostly logistics. Nothing warm. Patricia visits often, and the Gulf Shores house stays in the family, exactly the way her mother wanted it. Margaret still calls occasionally, mostly just to see how I'm managing. As for me, I still sit at that kitchen table on Cervantes Street most mornings, coffee going cold while I look out at the Gulf breeze moving the curtains, and some days I still reach for the notebook, just to remember how carefully she chose everything right up to the end. If you've ever had to watch someone you love clearly, even when it broke your heart to see it, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Dad's Revenge Tales. There are more to come.